and live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Red Lotus Life. Super excited to be here today. As always, I have my beautiful co-creator here, Sarah Elizabeth Hoffman, and then we have our special guest, Enos Barger, who is with us to, we've been doing this series that has actually become quite popular now, and it's on narcissistic tendencies, behaviors, the personality type. And we've just been having these really amazing conversations with Enos around, I guess, just kind of going deeper into these personality types and this personality style so that we can have a better understanding and develop compassion and empathy for this personality style. And it's been amazing. For those of you who haven't, this is the first time you've watched it, I highly suggest going back to the very first episode that we did. It was actually Navigating Narcissism, a Healing Dialogue, where you really get to know Enos on a deeper level. And so grateful actually for that. We've had so much feedback on that episode, and just thank you for your vulnerability, your transparency, and for being here on the show with us. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So today sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You're good.
So today we wanted to talk about some of the things that go on during the holidays. It's a really hard time of year for a lot of people, especially with co-parenting and just in general. I mean, the conversations that we've been having in our private discussions it's been quite, like, we could actually go pretty deep today, I think. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. We're just going to have a candid, real, raw conversation about some of the things that we've experienced, some of the questions that viewers have been writing in for the show, specifically for Enos. And just really, our intention today is really to just shed some light on what it is that everyone does go through during the holidays. Maybe why these times are hard, so that we can have a better understanding and be able to relate to each other in just a better way with that understanding, the compassion, the empathy. I know that because of these conversations, I had an incredible Thanksgiving holiday. It was very successful, where in the past, my holidays have not been awesome. So I just want to say thank you, Enos, for being here and for sharing your experiences and your perspectives with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for the courage to have these conversations. I know that it's you never know how things are going to be received, and thank you for providing a place for me to be able to be vulnerable and authentic and transparent and not feel, if there's anybody that would have reason to carry negative emotions into these conversations, you both would. And I just, I love the space that you've held and the safety and the care that you've taken with me. And I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just kind of want to dive right in.
She's like, let's do it.
I know, let's just do it. We don't need the small talk. Let's just do it already. So, Sarah Elizabeth, you have had a lot of stuff just flowing for you. So you just barely came back from a family. Well, you had a huge family gathering, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a long time. Were you there for an entire week?
I was.
Yeah. So I would just actually like to turn it over to you, and I'd just like you to start maybe sharing a little bit about what has been coming up for you in the past week.
Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to just go ahead and again share my gratitude with both you and Enos for being here, for having these conversations, for showing up, for all of us being able to hold space for one another, and also just the ability to be vulnerable in these spaces and feel safe and held. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say that right away. But as far as what has come up over the holidays, it has been so full of gratitude, and also fascinating, coming from a healed perspective, and being in those spaces, witnessing the work that we have done that can be seen tangibly, the work that other family members have done that can be seen and felt tangibly, and also witnessing different dynamics with different personality types at play. I want to use discernment when speaking here to make sure that I'm coming from a place of love and coming from the heart. These topics are touchy subjects when it comes to family and when it comes to holidays and traditions. These topics are so relevant around the holidays, around what we've experienced as abuse survivors, starting all the way from childhood, and then how we see those play out generationally, as well as how we bring those experiences into relationships as adults. So I know for Lori and I both, a lot of these things, well, I won't speak for Lori, but a lot of these things for me definitely did root in childhood, and the experiences that I had in childhood around abusive situations. So situations could be particularly heightened around the holidays, and I have a very vivid memory of a particular situation that I'm not going to share all of the details around, but it did end up erupting in violence, and other family members as well as myself were involved and ended up, being hurt. So one of the things that we were talking as we were, privately chatting was the fact that, and Enos actually brought this up, and it's such a powerful point, is when we have these experiences in childhood, then what happens is we develop this feeling of powerlessness. We develop that feeling of hypervigilance. And then until we start to do our own inner work, we sort of stay stuck in that place, right? Because we don't have the self-awareness yet. We don't really have the emotional intelligence. And then we end up in interactions where those childhood wounds are playing out within relationships. And so to be able to go and be in a space with family and to witness that healing on a deep level, and also witness where there's still healing to be done. Be able to witness where the projections are coming from, just sort of being present as an observer. That was a really huge shift for me, was the ability to be in the family dynamic without being triggered. Like literally I could be there as an observer. And then also help support, make some of those connections. Like, for example, help make the connection between there's a difference between complaining as compared to venting. And so, a family member was having a conversation with me around, well, if I'm complaining, then am I not just doing the same thing that is being complained about? And I was like, well, actually, there's a really big difference between complaining and venting. Like there's times when we don't need to repress. We need to actually allow that energy to move, in order to be able to shift and move in a different direction. So it's really beautiful to witness the entire process, and how us showing up from a healed space can really change the frequency and vibration of the entire dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the ways in talking about the complaining versus venting is one of the ways I've started to try to distinguish between those two is the other party releasing something, or are they looking for company? And and I think that's where I kind of, it helps me draw the distinction, because what you want to be supportive of people you care about. What you don't want to do is be drugged down into the mire with them, because they're not really looking to feel better. They just want somebody to join in the way that they feel. And that's a common pattern, I think, in wounded people, narcissism included, where there's a discontent and an anger and a boiling rage inside, and much of the action, much of what's said and done to other people is to level the playing field. And it's a hard thing sometimes to draw the line between, but I think you're speaking to something we talked about a little bit in the last recording, which is, as you understand yourself better and then you understand others better, you begin to see the game kind of underneath the game. And when you can see the way the game is played, and to say game, I'm not making light of this, but it's just a metaphor. When you can see it for what it is, it feels less personal. You're able to back away from it and not emotionally attached, like you were talking about. You're able to be a part of the family unit, but not being drug into the fray, right? And there's something empowering about that. It builds sovereignty. It builds empowerment, and it builds the ability to manage that distance between what's going on and its ability to sway your emotions on a moment by moment basis. And really, that's where people that's the power that people wield when in trauma attachments or unhealthy relationships, right? So I'm glad that's changed and shifted for you in your experiences this last holiday.
Thank you. I love the way that you expressed that, actually. It really offers a deeper understanding, which is really our goal. When we're able to, again, see the game within the game, and we're able to come from a place of perspective, feeling underneath what's underneath the wounds is basically what it boils down to. We're able to see underneath the wounds, and then able to find empathy on a much deeper level. And sometimes finding empathy where we once were never allowed to find, we weren't able to see the empathy or find the empathy, is what I'm trying to say. And so then even taking it a step further and looking at it generationally, and being able to be within those family dynamics and pinpoint, okay, where did this actually start? Because then we're talking about, okay, in the family tree, we had abuse over here, we had abusive situations over here. Where did those patterns start? So that now we can begin to break the cycles. This is how we become cycle breakers, by doing this deep inner work and being able to start to see below the fray. So I'd love to know, Lori, how has this shown up for you, or has this shown up for you?
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, the work that we do as emotional clearing practitioners, I mean, it really does break the cycle by releasing conditioning ancestrally and generationally. And so Sarah and I have actually, I feel like we're in kind of a unique relationship, because we've been doing this together as friends and sisters for years now. It's literally going on for 6 years, I feel like, and on a deep level. So now when we do have these family gatherings, we're literally watching the work that we're doing ripple out into the ancestral, right? With the generations that came before us, and then the generational with the generations coming after us, right? And so even in mine, like my mom was there, my daughter was there. it was just, again, same thing. I shifted into the place of the observer, and I was literally watching cycles break. The things that used to happen just weren't. And to be honest with you, I mean, I probably had a little bit to do with it. I hosted, and so I had a little bit to do with it. But honestly, I could literally see it as all of us were shifting into observer. And so there would even be things that we could call triggers or something like that that would happen in the past, because holidays have never been awesome for me. They've been very disruptive. As everyone knows, I think our perspectives here are really valuable to the listeners, because some things may seem more mild that one of us have gone through, and then we have like the medium. It's almost like, what is that story? Goldilocks and Three Bears. I feel like
the just right.
Like I feel like we have all these perspectives on all the levels that we've experienced. So for me, holidays have not been great as a parent, like co-parenting have not been awesome. And I was literally able to watch as the observer how, wow, we actually had a great Thanksgiving, and it was complete ease and flow and zero disruption. Usually there's a lot of disruption, a lot of uncomfortable, a lot of guilt trips, a lot of shame, a lot of there's just a lot that goes on. We have a very complicated situation over here. And so we just literally enjoyed each other. Like it just was. And that was what was so beautiful to witness. And even for me, I'll speak for myself here. In the past, whenever I have, like my children's father comes up in the conversation, I feel the constriction in my body, right? I'll feel it a little bit just because, and it could be something really great. It usually is. It's something really great. Like, hey, this is what's going on. But my body usually has that response of like, okay, I need a brace. I need to protect myself. I need something, even if it's nothing. And usually it's not. Our relationship is actually really a lot better now. So it's usually nothing like that. But because of the past traumas I've experienced, that's what I feel. And so it was really cool to actually go, oh, we had a really great conversation. I was like, how is everything over there? And I was hearing about it. And it was like, it just was. And I was happy for him and his family and just, all the things. And that was something that I haven't necessarily experienced before. And I have to 100% give Enos all the credit for this, because of our past conversations here on the podcast, we've been I was able to have a better understanding of things. And I was able to let so much go. I didn't have to have the walls. And it was all unconscious, had zero. I thought, I was pretty good, and I've been working on all of this for years and years and all the things. And we don't even really experience a lot of this anymore. Or like me personally, don't experience that a lot anymore. And, but it was interesting to even notice that, oh, my body didn't constrict. My body was open, and I was very authentic instead of trying to shift it in some way, or, be the better person and go, wow, I really I want to be happy, but am I really, and
Right.
Actually, be honest with you, now that I'm thinking about it, most of the time, I would probably change the conversation. That's what would happen. I would change the conversation. But this time I was truly interested. I truly, from an authentic place, really was interested in hearing about how is everything happening on that side? How is everyone on that side of the family? And, and that was 100% unconscious before. Zero clue that that's what I was doing before. So that was just huge. And I think by me shifting, of course, that changes and ripples out in the environment, right? At the dinner table or whatever. But yeah, it was just overall, I could see it's all the layers, right? It's all the layers that end up happening. But it was great.
I love that. I love that that experience and the fact that it's so tangible, like you can really touch it, right? It feels as if you can really touch it. I actually had an experience that I haven't shared with you yet. There's been so much to share. And I know when I was sharing recently, I was like, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. Like we're not even close yet. But as you were sharing that, it reminded me about the shifts that I felt. And I love, Enos, that you brought up the topic of armor, and then Lori, the bracing and the way that you respond or you react within the body, but it's unconscious. I noticed a huge point of healing when a person, a family member, had a phone conversation with someone who in the past would have triggered me instantly. And even quite a while after I had been doing the healing work, as Lori shared, we've been doing this work together for so long, so she probably is pretty familiar with most of the times that I was triggered by this person. And one particular time, there was a possibility that they may show up for the family event, and I was just completely out of my body, dissociated, ready to fight. I will be quite honest, like I wanted to confront this person. And in all honesty, had every right to. And to this day still would. But because of the work that we've done, and in large part, again, because of the conversations we're having here with Enos, I had no trigger in my body. I was able to feel compassion. I was able to allow it to just move through me. And sort of similar to what Lori was sharing, I just acknowledged the fact that it's beautiful that you can have this conversation, especially when the person who was having that conversation was also has every right to be upset, is what I'd like to share. So huge shifts. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are you all, I know that both of your families are well aware of the work that you're doing. Some of that's being also trickling out and being done by various family members. And I wondered, at any point during the holiday gathering where the family was all around, do people feel empowered to speak about some of these things, or does anyone comment when they notice, when they're observing, and does it become any sort of maybe even a side conversation after the fact with someone who's in the process of doing some of this work, and has it opened up does it allow you to open up dialogues? Because I find that sometimes it's much easier to find traction to talk with someone about something difficult when the instance is fresh, or you've got an example that's both top of mind for you and other people in the group.
For me, absolutely, I find that it helps to gain traction. Not only does it create a container of safety for those when they can either feel that you've done a lot of work, or they can feel the shift in your energy. And they want to know, what are you doing? Yes, I had a couple of people share that, I'm going through some stuff, the situation, and I need what you have, kind of thing. And there are also some really beautiful moments of reflection of how others have been able to catch themselves in projections and be able to shift their energy and move forward, responding in a different way. It really is contagious, I think, to some extent, right? And I think sometimes, and maybe even most of the time, it takes a lot of planting little tiny seeds, and it also takes a lot of showing up in a different way and people getting to a place where they trust and believe you too. It can't just be one time. It has to be continuous, and they have to see the work over periods of time, to really trust that, yeah, this is something that actually works.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one, because honestly, in the beginning, and I feel like a lot of the things that we say and that you say, Enos, is kind of like we sit there and go, wow, we could tell each other's stories. We really could. Like, we've all experienced it just in different ways. But when I start showing up in a different way, it's actually not trusted. And it doesn't seem, in the beginning, it's not trusted, and it doesn't seem authentic. And it does feel, especially with some of the relationships that I have, like co-parenting, right? That would be one of the first things actually that would be said, is like, what do you have planned? Like, that's what would come out of their mouth, is like, what's going on? You have a strategy, what's happening? Because I would show up differently, and I would show up in an authentic way, but I had to continue to keep showing up that way. And even with other people, like, they would just sit there and go, like, it's hard, actually. Sarah, you and I were talking about this, how I think it wasn't until I started doing this work that I actually didn't realize that you're supposed to just hold space. You're not supposed, like, there's a lot of projection that ends up happening in conversations, and people don't even know. It's just unconscious, right? It's unconscious. You're not self-aware. You're not realizing what you're doing. And so when there's like, if you're just there and you're just holding space, sometimes people think you're not paying attention. You're not present, because you're not offering advice. You're not validating them. You're not any of the things. But when you become self-aware, it's actually like you actually say, hey, if somebody's not asking you for advice or not asking you for feedback or reflection, then you actually offer that and say, would you like reflection? Because a lot of times people just want you to hold space, and they just need to process. And it comes back to that venting versus complaining thing, right? And so whenever you are doing that, when you are self-aware and you're doing that, and your family or these relationships that you have with it, intimate relationships, they don't trust it. And then they kind of wonder what's happening here. And so you have to keep showing up that way, which, if it's authentic, you're showing up that way anyway. You don't even have to think about it. It's not a conscious behavior. You're just doing it. And so when your actions actually match your words, then that's where people can trust. And then that's when they can actually let their guard down, because they can see, this is real, this is authentic. I can actually, like, I can show up differently. I can be vulnerable. I can be transparent. And so whenever you're talking about this, Enos, and you ask the question of, does it bring up things? So in my family, we still have to be careful with doing that right then. Like, I actually have to fill it out. I'm very much in the state of the observer. But what I have done is now I bring it up after the fact. And I actually, like, especially with my kids, I actually will call them or something and bring it up. And it's usually a little bit down the road, but I'll bring it up and say, I am so proud of you, because I'm seeing their shifts, and I'm seeing how they're handling themselves. And I think a lot of it goes with, they're growing up, they're in their 20s now. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. But I think because I'm showing up differently, their father's showing up differently, everyone around us is showing up differently, they're able to show up differently. And they don't have, I'm kind of tying this even back into the childhood stuff that you were talking about, Sarah. It's like, the kids really do experience all of this. Like, they can feel it, they can see it, they can hear it. It's experience, sometimes it's happening to them physically, emotionally, mentally. It's all the things. And it's them showing up in that way too. So it's just interesting and fascinating to do this work, and then to have the holidays come up and see, holy I'm like, I don't know if I'll get censored. So that's why I'm like, it's like, holy cow, holy cow. this work is tangible. We're seeing the tangible evidence of the work. It's not just, I mean, we already knew that anyway, because we can feel it, but now we're seeing it literally ripple out in the family dynamics. And that's huge.
Something you talked about there. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung. And for those that that he's the psychiatrist of notoriety that I most identify with, having his ideas together. I think he hit the mark at a lot better than Freudian psychology has as well. But it says, projection of our own shadow makes the whole world a replica of our unknown face. And when you're talking about your ex, he was be on guard when you approach the situation differently, non-combatively or whatever, and there's a suspicion that kicks in, and it's just a mirror of that unknown face to him, which is suspicion, which is the only time that he's going to put out, or I don't want to personalize it, the only time a lot of times people with these conditions will put on that sort of facade is when they're angling for something that's going to make it better for them. And so the suspicion is automatically arisen. And for folks that aren't necessarily battling with that particular manifestation of past trauma, sometimes the silence feels like judgment, because that's the go-to. And so there's a discomfort sometimes in silence. And that's why it's really one of the best negotiation tactics in the world. If you're going to buy a car and you ask for something, just stop talking and let the uncomfortable silence negotiate for you. People who aren't rooted tend to feel very uncomfortable in that silent space. But I definitely see what you're saying. It takes a while, and for some of us, trust needs to be earned back, because the actions didn't match the words, and so it's always difficult to have changed internally, and then having to wait for the rest of the world to trust that change is real. But it's part of the process, and that discomfort is a good reminder as to why it's important to be authentic going forward. Because if you want trust, you have to live trustworthy, in a trustworthy manner. One of the things that comes to mind, and if this is steering us in the wrong direction, by all means, let me know. But I think there are some folks that are going to be listening to this who are not in a healed state, or are still actively in a situation in which the agents of chaos or disruption in their life are still actively a part of the life, and they maybe have not gotten to a point where, fortunately, you both have been able to get to. So I'm curious if there's anything to be spoken to. How did you cope before you got to this point where, what were the things that you felt, and what do you wish you could tell that version of you, however many years ago that was, who was walking into this time of the year? And, is there anything that you think could bring value and something that's maybe actionable for someone who's facing that in right now?
Okay, you're going to make me think here. Okay, so I think the very first thing that I would say just immediately, as far as what would I tell that version of myself, or anybody who's walking into that a situation that's potentially abusive, or a situation where there's chaos, emotions are high, I think the very first thing that I would have said to myself years ago would have been to do your inner work first. Really, really, really do the work to be in a place of power, in a place of sovereignty, and really, really know your own inner landscape prior to engaging in any sort of relationship, or maybe not necessarily any relationship, but any potential partner that would be long-term for sure. And that's really a hard one to say, because to suggest that at that age, when I did begin to engage in those types of relationships, I also didn't have the awareness necessarily that I needed to do the work that I needed to do, because everything that I was experiencing was normal.
Right.
In my world, it was normal. And so because I began having those experiences so young, I was moving through the world already with no boundaries whatsoever. In my mind, I thought that I had boundaries, but until I started to do this work, I didn't understand that I actually had zero boundaries whatsoever. I made attempts to hold boundaries, but there's always that place where there's the breakdown, where you're no longer, you just kind of throw your hands up. Okay, this isn't working anymore, so I'm just going to give in. And then nothing ever shifts or changes. The conversations don't happen. You're not able to have any kind of conflict resolution. And things just continue to cycle, going in exactly the same direction. Until you have that moment. And I always talk about, like, there was that aha moment for me where I heard the word, something has to change and it has to be me. I would say to any young person to start to do this work as early as the awareness is there. And I think that a huge part of that is us having these conversations to get the awareness out there that it's important. And no matter where you are as a parent or on your journey, it's never too late. It's never too late. I would say that I've been doing this work very, very intentionally for the better part of 10 years for sure. It started before that, but I was having awarenesses that things were not right in my relationships. And of course, there was a lot of repression. I thought that I could just leave the experiences in the past and that they weren't going to haunt me in my present, right?
Right.
So I think it really goes a long way with beginning to educate the children. There's so many different ways that we cope, even unconsciously along the way, that it's even hard. That's an entire conversation. I love that you asked that question. It's an entire conversation. And it takes me back to something that continually sort of plays in my head, and that is, why do we do this work? It's so that we can have a voice for our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, our fathers, and most of all, for the children.
Yes. I would, I've never been on the other side of this, but I can see, I've seen what it looks like for a mother. And, thank God for mothers. The constant concern and care for the kids' experiences and their life, and what trying to create this picture of perfection around the holidays is what I think I see commonality in every loving, caring, tender mother that's just looking out for their kids. And I think the thing that I would want to say is, you know, it's not entirely in your power to control that experience. And, you know, and the guilt that comes when the child's experience falls short of what this idyllic picture that we have in place that we want for them to have, it's not yours to own. You know, you're doing the best you can, and you can't control all the environment, all the things in the environment around you. And so have some grace and compassion for yourself, and understand that you're doing the best that you can. It's an impossible position to be in, because in order to make peace and keep things at a simmer rather than a boil, you lay down your sovereignty. You consistently give of yourself, and you make sacrifices of yourself that you would not normally give in that arrangement, just to keep that peace, so that they've got some just maybe a little bit of time where it's not what it is all the other times. And the pressure of the holidays tends to just cause all that stuff to boil up. And just, I would just say, give yourself some grace and some compassion, that it's not yours it's impossible for you to manage and fix and control. And trying to, adding guilt and shame into the mix of everything else that you're dealing with in that situation is like tying lead weights around yourself when you're trying to swim. It's in the currents. It's already a difficult thing to do. And so I would just hope that the people out there that are dealing with these relationships can understand that, yes, you may have chosen to be in a relationship with this person. You may have chosen to have children with this person, but you did so at a time in your life where you didn't have the understanding that you've gotten to today. And so, I can assure you, my journey to healing on my side of this has only ever been hampered by the mantle of guilt and shame that I carried with it. And Brene Brown was talking about this, and what she said something about guilt is regretting an action. Shame is a condemnation of self. And you can't punish yourself into change. You can only love yourself into evolution. And so, if you're looking to heal, let that go. Let it go, because so much of it isn't yours to own anyway. But even the part that is, you won't get to the destination you're seeking faster as a result of dragging that along behind you. So that's probably the only perspective I can really lend to this part of the conversation. But I just have a tremendous appreciation for the people who are fighting to try to keep some level of normalcy for their family in situations like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would actually like to speak to that part, where I love the question that you asked on what advice, or what can you give to the people who are in these situations or experiencing this right now. I feel like I must have been a really extreme part in this one as well, because I love everything that the both of you just said. And so I'll be just tying it back in here a little bit, because I personally really wanted to work on my inner self, because I grew up with a Japanese background. So I actually did have these boundaries, or what I thought was boundaries, right? And I had my Japanese family also backing me up with these boundaries, right? After the fact. So I'm talking about after leaving the relationship and now experiencing Christmas and Thanksgiving, like this time of year holidays. We had great holidays, actually. When we were together, they were amazing holidays. It was amazing. It was a wonderful time of year for us. That changed once I left the relationship. And once I left the relationship, it was none of those things. It was actually the complete opposite of that. And so I personally did work on myself as much as I was able to at that time. I didn't get into relationships. I didn't want to bring everything back in. I didn't want to bring emotional baggage and all that stuff into a relationship. I was very mindful about who my children met. We were talking about this a little bit before, or I heard you two actually talking about it a little bit before about how different people get introduced, right? Even at these times of year. So there's so many layers to what happens. So yeah, I also agree with Sarah on this. Definitely do the work. Don't bring this stuff into another relationship. That just complicates it all even further. It brings so much heightened emotions and sensitivities and everything else. And sometimes the person that you're bringing into this situation has zero clue what's going to happen or what may happen, right? And they're just kind of like this innocent bystander, and they get caught in the dysfunction of it all. So I love that you even brought that up. I like that you said really get into a place of power and empowerment, because that, yes, definitely, and get really clear on boundaries and communicate those boundaries. But the situation I was in, it didn't matter how clear I was. It didn't matter how much I communicated. None of that mattered. The boundaries were crossed on purpose at extreme levels. And when I say that, I'm talking like I would go to pick up the kids for, it's now a holiday break and they're not there. They're not there. They've already been picked up. Who knows where they are, that type of thing. And so what I did, and this is something that I share with my clients quite a bit, because it's this whole unknown that kind of happens, and it's how you talk about the leveraging, right? And the leveraging is, I feel like, the ultimate, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I experienced. The ultimate was, like, I'm a planner. I like to plan. Especially the holidays. That's what we do, right? We plan.
Right.
We plan.
How do you survive it otherwise?
Yeah, exactly. And so the leverage was, I'm going to do whatever I can. So you have no clue what to plan. Like, even if I sent the plan, if I sent the visitation, if I sent, hey, I'm going to work with you. Let's work together. Let's even on the same day, let's work together. It went totally against all of that. So there was no plan. There was nothing. So, and also I wouldn't ever know, would I be celebrating with the kids that day or not? So what I did I started to create my own boundaries with self, because that's something that Sarah and I talk about quite a bit. Of the boundaries, we've been conditioned to think boundaries are for someone else, and they're not. They're for us, right? They're for self and how we're going to respond to people. We actually have a lot of that on the channel. So if anybody wants to check more into boundaries and how we talk on that, you can check that out. But I started to place the boundaries for self and going, okay, so this is what's going to happen if this happens, right? This is how I will respond if this happens. And what ended up how I responded is I started to celebrate the holidays, not on the holiday. And I started to celebrate I took my power back and started to celebrate from an empowered place by actually celebrating the holidays before the holiday. And so we would actually already have experienced Christmas or something like that. And then if I were to have the kids during that time period, then we had another one. We just did it differently. And so what actually has started to become a huge tradition for us because of this, we do a lot of service work actually during this time. And that's why we have the giving tree. And that's why we go out and we do, play Santa, deliver gifts, that kind of thing, because I would celebrate the holiday before, and then on the actual holiday, now we were free to actually go and help others in a different way, or enjoy each other, whichever that is.
That's beautiful.
So that was actually how I was able to take my power back. That was how I was able to set boundaries for self and actually go, okay, what happens now? In fact, we did it on Thanksgiving this year, and everybody thought that was weird. Everyone in my family was like, wait, what? We're actually doing it on Thanksgiving? I was like, yeah. So that's what happened. The other part, I wanted to get a couple of these things in because this is exactly what I experienced. And Sarah, Elizabeth, and I talked about this yesterday. And so I do want to bring this in because it's what I would tell myself if that version of myself. I always felt, so we were talking about finances, right? So financial abuse is kind of what goes on here, right?
Yeah.
And so what tends to happen, and it doesn't matter, who in the relationship this is, but there's usually a breadwinner, right? There's a breadwinner in the relationship. And then the very first holiday or Christmas, I'll say Christmas specifically, that happens afterwards, it's a very strange time because you're used to giving a great Christmas, right? With gifts or whatever, like as a couple, or what you're able to actually provide that. And you want to provide that again, but usually, I'm not going to say all the time, usually there's one of the parents that doesn't have the financial stability that they once had. So it puts them in this really strange constricted place of just like what you said, Enos, thank you so much for sharing what you did around mothers and motherhood and all of that. It goes also for the fathers who have custody of their kids and different things, but it's you want to provide what they've had in the past as far as material things go, especially because we're conditioned to think that Christmas is this big, huge thing. And so you want to provide that again for them. And also for me, I felt like, well, I have to provide memories for my children. Like that's where I was at. Like, what are they this is what they were used to. So I have to provide this. And I was somebody who I did experience financial abuse. So yes, I had a good job, but my good job was literally just paying the bills. There was nothing left over for that. And so when it came to that first Christmas, it was hard. It was really, really hard. And what happened is that I had to get help from other people, like other organizations and other people. But also this happened also for probably 2 to 3 more years, I want to say, that I went into a lot of debt too at Christmas time. And it took me so here's what was happening is their father was giving this big, huge Christmas. And then I'm giving this big, huge Christmas as much as I can. And what I finally realized after year 3 or 4, why are my kids getting 2 ginormous Christmases? I started going, what is that? So I was happy that their father was able to provide that. Happy for that. And then that's actually when I started scaling back. And it would be more about the traditions. I would bring in his family's traditions. I would bring, in fact, even still to this day, I was super close with his family. So his family traditions are in. I absolutely love them. And then we'd mix in ours. So it became more about that and more about the quality of time we spent together versus the material things. And now that they're older, we actually only do, they're in their 20s now. So we actually just do a name draw at Christmas time. And we just name draw and everybody gets one gift. That's it. Max of $50. That's it. And we do a gift exchange. And it's literally about the traditions. It's about the time we spend together, all of that. And then the other part that I wanted to bring in here too, that I think is really important, is that when that happened, and this is what I'd love to hear from you, Enos, actually, for me, just my perspective. I'd love to hear your perspective. So when that happened and I started to pull back and it started to be more about the spirit of Christmas, it started to be more about the service work, things like that, because they were received. I finally got it in my head. Oh, they are receiving a Christmas. It's great. They're having it over here. So what ended up happening was when it wasn't affecting me anymore, there wasn't that leverage there anymore. Then it started to move into the kids. And so then there would be Christmases where one child would get $1,000 worth of gifts while the other child got 0, nothing. And then vice versa. So it would be, the leverage would start happening with the kids and whatever relationship was happening at that time there. And so, and it was really interesting for me as a mom, because that's when I realized not realized, but I felt powerless. That's when I felt powerless. I felt powerless in the very beginning. Once I was able to, get a handle on that and my own ego and all the things, then I saw it transfer. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And if you don't have experience with it, it's 100% okay.
Well, I don't have direct experience with that personally, but I do have people in my life that do, and someone very close to me, his wife, very much had that sort of thing, and there's still to this day a playing of the kids against each other, and in respect to inheritance and all these other things, and it's a way to, like I said, leverages the currency of the narcissist, and so, I think the hard thing is just, they know that it's tearing you apart because you're watching it with your kids, and but it's one of those things where without having to badmouth the person that's doing this, you can bring awareness to the kids that, healthy relationships, the love you get isn't contingent upon how well you subscribe to this behavior that's expected of you by the other person, and it's not your fault that you're in this situation. I know it hurts, and I know that it feels like rejection. But when you understand that, understand that that's not a healthy relationship, and that if you have to acquiesce, and you have to be a certain version of yourself to get something from someone, that's a good sign that if you have the option to not be in a relationship with another person that behaves that way, then you shouldn't, because it's not built on an equal footing of respect and love. And that's a hard thing to tell a kid about their parent, but the truth is they already feel it anyway. They're kids have an intuition that's we often overlook, and we don't give it we don't see it for how deep it can be. But it's a tough thing. But if you these relationships from parent to child, like Sarah saw in some of her past experiences, it creates a fertile ground and that's how these cycles continue down the line. So, informing your children, and especially if you can give them a very simple example of where you've seen it play out, maybe between your own kids, for example, like, well, you can play with this toy, but as long as you play it my way. Right. And so when you can boil it down into simple examples like that, then they can see it a little bit better at the macro, and understand that it's not their fault that they were on the wrong end of the deal this year versus last. It's just a matter of other, people have deficiencies, including parents, and sometimes, they're not fair, but it's the situation. And I think that's the best thing that you can do to try to, again, if you can take the teeth out of that leverage, then it goes away. And so it's sad that kids have to suffer as a result, to be played in the middle, kind of, to really, I mean, in the end, the intent was to get at you. And so the intent is to make you feel guilty as a result, like, you chose this, so this is the ramifications of it. And that would be the best advice, or the best way I could speak to that situation.
How would you, let's see, and you may have answered this already. How would you go about cultivating a shift in that? because ultimately they want a loving relationship, right? So if they're the ones who are self-aware, because that's what I've noticed, the more self-aware I am, the more I can show up differently. And then the interactions differently, and the communication is different. Like everything about it is different, and it evolves into a more peaceful experience, right? And so what would you say if they are more self-aware around this? How can they show up differently to actually cultivate the shift there? Because this was happening with them when they were probably teens, and usually it was, one would be like get in trouble or talk back or like that type of thing.
Right.
And it was hard though, because in the past it was an amazing time. So it was yes, it was me ultimately, but also what are some things that you can give to them if they are self-aware, that they can actually cultivate that? Because I do believe that this can happen. And that's why we're having these conversations,
So we're talking about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm saying
you're
that's why
talking
we're
about
having these conversations. It's not
Right.
to like out anyone out. It's not to say, hey, it's not from a victim state. This is what I've experienced. It's how can we shift this and change it to cultivate it into a loving relationship. And I honestly feel like a lot of it has to do with communication.
So you're talking about, just to clarify, you're talking about the kids in the relationship have become more self-aware, and you're not the former partner, right?
Yeah, because at that point I don't have, I'm not there. I can't.
I just wanted to make sure
happening over here. And so I was able to do what I could, like what you said. I don't like bad mouthing or anything like that. All that does is just actually make it worse, right? So
sure.
How can kids, if they're old enough, right? They're old enough, they're teens or whatever age that they can, without being in that place of, I have to be good, I have to do this, I have to do that. How can they actually start to shift that relationship with their parents during these times?
Yeah. I would say if they're becoming self-aware, hopefully part of that is they're starting to become more secure in their identity. That isn't something they derive as a mirror of how their parent is behaving in the situation. And I think I think you have to be able to be, first of all, you have to be able to be honest with them, and maybe without vilifying the other person, because like you said, that's just going to drive a wedge. And so maybe if you can come from a place of understanding and empathy of why that behavior is happening, and explaining to them that these are conditions that come out of past trauma and hurt, and it feels very personal to you that this is going on, but understand that it's really not directed at you. It's a condition of what's going on inside that other person. And if you can help them understand that it truly isn't personal, then I think it's easier then to cope. And at that point, they can, and just reinforce that who you are and your value has nothing to do with how much attention, how many gifts, how much love, and how much acceptance you get from someone who's still struggling to just accept themselves. And the extent, that partner is loving them at the extent that they're capable of loving themselves. And that when you put it in those terms, especially because there are micro examples of these sorts of behaviors within teens friend groups, for example. And so if you can if you can snap them out of the really deep emotional part of that, of engagement with, because it's a parent involved or even a grandparent or someone that's very close, if you can pull them out of that and put it in a situation that doesn't have the same emotional ties and the deep hooks in them, and begin to play those pieces out, show them the game within the game. And, like, why do you think this person behaved this way to this other person? You have this friend group. And so if you can maybe get them out of that state, because it's very hard to see reality when you're in the middle of it, because the emotion just clouds it all and it makes it very hard to be objective about it. But if you can kind of supplant them into an observer standpoint, into another picture of this, then they become the observer in this relationship. And I think that's probably the best chance you've got with kids, where you don't want to, you're not trying to alienate yourself and the other parent, because ultimately they're still going to be in their life until the kids are in a position to where they're old enough to be able to make the decision whether or not that other person stays in their life. And I know we're running short on time, but I think that leads to maybe a question that had come in from someone that had emailed in, I think Lori, and I would hate to get out of this conversation, so I'm willing to go a little longer and delay my next meeting if we can answer that question. But I think this parlays perfectly into that. If you'd like to bring that up or address that.
Yeah, I would love that. And that was a perfect answer, actually. And it tied into Sarah saying we need to teach the kids, right? We need to teach the kids a different way. So that was perfect. Thank you for that. And thank you for staying a little longer too, but also trying to be aware of your time. So thank you. So yeah, the question that came in was from someone who has been watching all the series on this, and also the boundaries and everything else. And she was just saying, with co-parenting, what's the best form of communication when somebody's receiving the same questions? So in this situation, the same questions where it was regarding the child actually is choosing agency of not wanting to go to that parent's house for the holidays. And the same questions keep coming up. But honestly, again, it comes back to that communication. So she's just asking, what's the best form of communication? Because ultimately, like, I can't even imagine not having a relationship with my children. I would never want that for anyone, regardless of the personality type. So again, that's why we're having these conversations, right? Is to be able to strengthen this. So, yeah, what's the best form of communication when somebody is relentless with the guilt, the shame? Why isn't this happening? I don't, it's, and also pointing back.
Or why are you keeping my kids from me? Like, what have you told them that makes them not want? Yeah,
just any of that. What's the best form of communication? And we've all heard the gray rock theory of you just a gray rock and you just ignore and all that. But I think there's a better way.
Well, Sarah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of formulate my answer, or if you wanted to go first. I know that actually between when Sarah and I met and when we started recording these sessions, this was actually somewhat of a topic that we had discussed about her previous experience. So I don't want to step in front of that. If you feel like you've got something that you wanted to answer with.
So I'm sort of in the process of allowing a stream of consciousness to sort of drop in. And my immediate response would be some feeling into how have I taught my own children. And I have gone through this with one of my children choosing agency. And there has now been a lengthy amount of time since she has chosen to have any sort of interaction. I think the best way to communicate and handle it goes right back to what we were just sharing. It goes back to that quote that you just shared with Carl Jung. It's mirror theory. We teach them mirror theory. We teach them to speak authentically, but also using discernment. We teach them how to determine what is a projection. We teach them that when we do recognize that there's a projection, then even deeper than that, we are understanding that that is a direct reflection of what is the inner landscape of the other person. At some point, when the child chooses agency, for me, once that was understood completely, then I just knew that I was going to do whatever I needed to do in order to make sure that her agency was validated and that it was held. Up until that point, I did the best that I could in communicating, and this was prior a good amount of time before I really started to shift into a more state of empowerment. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to go back and to actually remember what my experience was here. But what I do remember is there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of shame, and there was a lot of guilt. But I had to be so much in my power in order to stand up for my child. And so what I did was I communicated in ways that were not confrontational. I understood that when the other parent was communicating, just as I would teach my children, that when the other parent is communicating in ways that are intentionally causing guilt and shame, judgment, criticism, attempting to make you feel small, that again, that's just a reflection of their own experience, and it has nothing to do with the child. There are times in which, there's court orders and mandates as far as what has to be done, as far as custody is concerned. And so I know that those times can get a little bit heated. They can feel really heavy. But after they are of age and they choose agency, then for me as a parent, it was my job, my responsibility as a mother, to uphold that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll attack it a little bit from more of maybe a practical strategy perspective, because I don't have that same experience that Sarah has. I would say it goes back to some of the same advice I would give anyone, which is manage the distance. You want a communication method that allows you to have ultimate control over when you engage and at what level you engage. I think one of the specific questions was, why don't my kids want to see me? And I think at that point you take the time, one time, to write out a honest assessment of what it would take for them to heal their relationship with their children, including the things that they need to heal within themselves, and say, manipulation and guilt and anger and all of these things have damaging effect on kids, and they're suffering as a result of your actions. And I don't mean that to hurt you, but the barrier to entry is to respect your kids and treat them the way that they need to be treated. And if you want to have a relationship with them, it's available to you, but you have to do your side of the work. They're not going to meet you where you're at. It's not their responsibility as children to meet you where you're at. I would stay very even keeled. Don't go on the attack. State facts. do it as compassionately, but without emotion as you can. That's going to be met with narcissistic rage in the case of a narcissistic rage, and they're going to come back. And the best way to deal with a narcissist is to starve them, because what they're wanting is narcissistic fuel, which is your engagement back and emotion. And so communicate only when you're ready, don't feel compelled to respond. They might become incessant. I would set some boundaries. Again, you don't expect those boundaries necessarily to be held. Boundaries are a great indication of what someone else's intentions are. Boundaries are beautiful in the fact that someone will always tell you where they're at based upon whether they honor your boundaries or they don't honor them. And you can give them an ultimatum and say, this is the only text message I'm going to respond to tonight. If you continue to message me, I will block you until you settle down. And make it, it's their decision. It's their decision to either continue or not continue. And, but if they come back with the same question again, why don't my kids want to see me? And say, see Exhibit A. I've laid this out. I've not poisoned them against you. I've not done any of the things to try to separate you from your children. These are your actions, and you have to own them. And until you're ready to do that, you're really never going to have a healthy relationship with them. And I want you to. I want more than anything for my kids to have a healthy relationship with you. But the health comes from you being healthy, as well as them coming to the table. So the method of communication, I would say, with that, as far as you can monitor what your kids' conversations are with this other partner. Try to keep them off the phone. The leverage and manipulation has so much more traction with children, and it's sad and it's tragic that that's the case. But try to insulate them from that, and if you can, insist that the communication happens in a group chat, and that way you've at least got the ability to see what's going on, put a stop to it if it needs to. You can shut the conversation down when they're in a toxic place, and you have a chance to mitigate the damage by having conversations with the kids, depending on how old they are, whatever's appropriate to give them context into what's happening in that conversation. Help them understand the game that's being played, not just the leverage that's being wielded in there to try to get what the other party wants out of the kids. It's a very difficult situation, and I have so much empathy for those that are in the middle of it. But those are just some of the tips I would give to try to navigate that minefield around these types of situations.
That was perfect from both of you. Yeah. So thank you. I actually feel like that's a perfect place to probably end even. So was there anything else that either one of you wanted to share?
No, not immediately.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to say,
Feels like the right time.
Yeah, this is amazing. I'm absolutely loving these conversations. So incredibly helpful. I already know that I'm going to be sending this out to so many people as soon as it's published. So for our listeners, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of our online community. We adore you. We love the questions. We love the comments. So please ask your questions and comment, whether you're listening to this on the audio platform or if you're watching this on YouTube. Please like this if this is more, you want to see more of this. Share it. Please share it. That's the reason why we're doing this. Share it with people that could find value in this, that are going through these situations right now. And then subscribe, because we honestly try to get on here at least once a week, whether that's with Enos, someone else with a resource, or even just something that Sarah Elizabeth and I are moving through or teaching on. We do have, let's see, Enos, is it okay if people contact you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's my first dot last name, Enos, ENOS .BARGER @gmail.com. I would invite anyone to reach out. I'd love to engage with people.
Thank you for that. Thank you for even being your vulnerability, your transparency. It's huge. So much gratitude for you. We do actually have a retreat that's coming up. It's the Red Lotus Life Zion Immersion Retreat, where Sarah Elizabeth and I are actually going to go deeper into this work. We're going to go deeper into the embodiment. We're teaching emotional clearing, the tool that actually has gotten us into this space. It's what gets us immediately into a grounded, centered, neutral place when we're in it, because we're still in it. And that's what we love about this tool. We think it's so important to actually share this tool with others and with their children. Children can learn this as well. So we're actually going to be teaching this. It's in Zion National Park at Namaste. It's a beautiful, beautiful space, and it will be a full-on immersion, April 10th through the 14th. We would absolutely love to have anyone that would like to come, because we're only going to do this. I think this is actually the only time we've done this in person, and we have plans to do it a couple times a year, but this will be the first one, which is going to be huge in person. We've been asked so many times to do it online. We've done it online. We want to do it in person, and we want to do it held by the majestic walls of Zion National Park. So that's what we have going on. It's the Remember Who You Are retreat. And Enos, I'm so excited. Would you like to come back?
Yes, absolutely. As many times as you'll have me.
Okay. Amazing, amazing. So if anyone has any questions or anything like that you'd like us to talk about, things that you're moving through, we're happy to do so. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.